The night my husband told me to sleep in the garage, I didn't argue. I simply smiled, picked up my pillow, and walked out of the bedroom without saying a single word. Looking back now, that was the moment our marriage truly ended. My name is Emma Carter. I was 35 years old, living in a beautiful house overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Newport Beach, California, and married to Jason Carter for 4 years. Most people believed we had the perfect marriage. They saw our vacations, our dinner parties, and the smiling photos on social media. They never saw the small humiliations that slowly replaced love. It always started with little things. Jason choosing everyone else's opinion over mine. Canceling our plans because his mother needed him. Laughing whenever I said I felt invisible. Every time I tried to explain how much it hurt, he gave me the same answer. "You're overreacting, Emma." After hearing those words for years, I almost started believing them. Everything changed the day his mother arrived with 3 suitcases. Just for a few days, Jason promised as he carried her luggage upstairs. Those few days became 2 weeks. Then 3. Soon it felt like I was the guest in my own home. Diane criticized everything I did. The way I cooked. The way I cleaned. Even the way I arranged flowers in the dining room. Jason never defended me. If anything, he usually agreed with her. One evening we sat down for dinner, when Diane suddenly put her fork on the table and sighed dramatically. "My back is getting worse," she said. "That guest room mattress is impossible to sleep on." Jason immediately looked at me. "Maybe Mom should have our bedroom for a while." I thought he was joking. I waited for him to smile. He didn't. "Where exactly do you expect me to sleep?" I asked quietly. Diane answered before he could. "The garage is clean. There's a sofa out there." I stared at both of them, waiting for someone to laugh. Nobody did. Jason shrugged as though it were the most reasonable solution in the world. "It's only temporary, Emma. Stop making everything into a big deal." For several seconds I said nothing. Then I stood up, carried my dinner plate to the sink, washed it, and walked upstairs. Jason probably thought I was finally accepting his decision. Instead, I packed a blanket, a pillow, and one small overnight bag before walking into the garage. It was cold. The old leather sofa smelled like dust and motor oil. I lay there staring at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep. Around midnight, I heard Jason laughing with his mother inside the house. Neither of them came to check on me. Neither of them cared. Just before sunrise, I quietly got up, changed into my favorite navy blue dress, picked up a folder from the locked drawer of my desk, and drove across town. 40 minutes later, I walked into the office of the attorney who had helped me buy this house years before I ever met my husband. He looked up from his desk, smiled politely, and asked, "Emma, what brings you here so early?" I placed the folder in front of him and took a slow breath. "I need to know something." He opened the first page, adjusted his glasses, and after only a few seconds looked back at me with genuine surprise. "Does your husband know?" He paused before finishing the sentence. "That this house has never legally belonged to him." My attorney leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Emma, I remember this closing better than almost any other." He opened another file from his cabinet and placed it beside the original paperwork. "You bought this house 2 years before you met Jason. You paid the down payment yourself, every mortgage payment came from your personal account, and after you married, you never added his name to the deed." I looked at the documents one by one. Everything was exactly as I remembered. "So legally?" I asked. He nodded. "Legally, Jason is living in your house." I sat quietly for several seconds. "Can he stop me from selling it?" The attorney smiled for the first time. "No." He turned another page toward me. "Unless you signed ownership over to him, this property is entirely yours." I felt something I hadn't felt in years, relief. Not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time in a long time, I realized I still had control over my own life. What if I decide to sell? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Then you can start the process today. I left his office carrying copies of every legal document and drove home before Jason returned from work. Diane was sitting in the living room watching television. She barely looked at me. Don't forget, she called out, I want salmon for dinner tonight. I smiled politely. Of course. Then I walked upstairs, opened my laptop, and contacted one of the highest-rated real estate agents in Newport Beach. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. Mrs. Carter. A woman asked, This is Olivia Brooks with Pacific Coast Realty. I received your request. I'd like to sell my house, I replied. There was a brief pause. It's a beautiful property. Homes in that neighborhood don't stay on the market very long. I looked around the bedroom that I was no longer allowed to sleep in. I don't want it on the market. She sounded confused. I'm sorry. I want a private sale. Another short silence followed. Then her voice became more serious. Those usually happen only when the seller wants everything completed quickly. Exactly, I answered. How quickly? Olivia checked something on her computer. If the right buyer is interested. She paused. You could sign the paperwork within a week. Before hanging up, she said one sentence that made me smile for the first time in months. I actually have someone looking for a house exactly like yours. I never told Jason about the meeting with my attorney. I never mentioned the real estate agent either. That evening, I cooked dinner exactly the way Diane liked it. Baked salmon, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. She smiled for the first time since moving in. See, she said proudly to Jason. She's finally learning. Jason laughed. I told you she'd come around. I smiled, served them both, and quietly ate my own dinner. Inside, I had already made my decision. After we finished eating, Diane looked at me. Don't forget to wash the dishes before you go to the garage. Jason didn't even look up from his phone. Thanks, Emma. That hurt more than I expected. Not because he was asking me to wash dishes. Because he spoke to me like I was someone who worked for him instead of his wife. The next morning, Olivia Brooks arrived at the house exactly at 10 o'clock. Jason was already at work, and Diane had gone shopping with a friend. Olivia walked slowly through every room, taking notes and photographs. This house is stunning, she said. Ocean view, quiet neighborhood, recently renovated. I won't have trouble finding a buyer. I nodded. I need someone who can close quickly. She smiled. I already told you yesterday. I have someone. We walked onto the back patio overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Olivia answered a phone call, spoke quietly for less than a minute, then looked at me with a surprised expression. Emma. She said, the buyer wants to see the house today. I looked at my watch. Jason wouldn't be home for another 6 hours. Bring him. Less than 40 minutes later, a black Mercedes stopped in front of the house. A well-dressed couple stepped out with their attorney. They walked through every room without saying much. The husband stopped in the master bedroom and smiled. My wife loves the view. His wife looked out toward the ocean and nodded. We'll take it. Olivia looked at them, then back at me. You don't want an inspection. The man shook his head. We've already reviewed everything. He reached into his briefcase and handed his attorney a document. We're prepared to pay your full asking price, in cash. My heart skipped a beat. Olivia looked almost as surprised as I was. That means we can close in. The attorney checked his calendar. 3 business days. I signed nothing that afternoon. But before leaving, the buyer looked at me and smiled. Mrs. Carter. He handed me his business card. I'll see you at the closing on Friday. I watched their car disappear down the street. Then my phone vibrated. It was a message from Jason. Mom says the garage needs to be cleaned tonight. Friday morning arrived faster than I expected. I met Olivia, the buyers, and both attorneys at a title office overlooking Newport Harbor. The closing took less than an hour. Every document was signed. Every payment was verified. When the final page slid across the table, I signed my name one last time. The attorney smiled and closed the folder. "Congratulations, Mrs. Carter." He handed me a cashier's receipt showing the money had already been transferred into my account. The property officially changed ownership at 11:42 this morning. I stared at the number on the paper for a few seconds. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the feeling. For the first time in years, nobody could tell me where I was allowed to sleep. Before leaving, the new owners asked one question. "When should we move in?" I looked at my watch. Jason usually came home around 6. I smiled politely. Today. At exactly 5:30 that afternoon, 2 moving trucks pulled into the driveway. Workers began unloading furniture, while the new owners walked through the front door with their realtor. I was sitting quietly on the patio drinking coffee when Jason's black SUV turned onto our street. He slowed down immediately. Then he stopped in the middle of the road. I watched him stare at the trucks with a confused expression before getting out of the car. "Emma." He called. "What's going on?" Before I could answer, Diane walked onto the porch. "Who are these people?" she demanded. One of the movers smiled politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am. We're moving the new owners into the house." Diane laughed. "Very funny." The mover looked confused. "I'm not joking." Jason turned toward me. "Emma, tell them they are at the wrong address." I calmly set my coffee cup on the table and stood up. "They're exactly where they're supposed to be." The buyer's attorney walked up the driveway carrying a folder. "Mr. Carter." Jason nodded. The attorney handed him a copy of the deed. "Ownership transferred this morning." Jason skimmed the first page before looking at me in complete disbelief. "You sold the house?" I nodded once. "Yes." His face turned red. "You can't do that." The attorney cleared his throat. "Actually, she can." Jason looked back at the paperwork. His hands began to shake. "This has to be some kind of mistake." The attorney calmly pointed to my signature, the closing documents, and the county recording stamp. "There is no mistake." Just then, another car pulled into the driveway. 2 uniformed police officers stepped out. One of them approached Jason respectfully. "Sir, the new owners requested a civil standby while they take possession of the property." Jason stared at the officer in disbelief. "You're throwing me out of my own house." The officer looked down at the paperwork, then back at Jason. "It was never your house." Jason grabbed the paperwork from the attorney and read every page twice. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely hold the documents. "This isn't happening," he muttered. "Emma, tell them this is a joke." I looked at him calmly. "It isn't." Diane stepped between us, her face red with anger. "You can't throw us out," she shouted. "I've lived here for almost a month." One of the police officers answered before I could. "Ma'am, the property changed ownership earlier today. The new owners have every legal right to take possession." Diane pointed at me. "She's his wife." The officer nodded. "That doesn't change who owns the property." Jason suddenly looked at me with desperation instead of anger. "Emma, we can fix this." I shook my head. "I asked you to fix us a long time ago." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The new owners gave Jason and Diane until sunset to remove their personal belongings. Moving boxes quickly filled the living room. Diane complained about everything. The movers, the police, the buyers, me. Jason remained strangely quiet. Every few minutes he stared at me as if he expected me to change my mind. I never did. While they packed upstairs, I walked one last time through the house I had once imagined growing old in. The kitchen where I celebrated my 32nd birthday. The patio where Jason proposed. The bedroom where I had spent my first night sleeping alone after his mother arrived. I realized something unexpected. I wasn't sad. I had already mourned this home the night I carried my pillow into the garage. Selling it was simply the final page of a chapter that had ended days earlier. As the last moving box was loaded into Jason's SUV, he walked toward me holding a small framed photograph. It was taken on our wedding day. We were laughing together on the beach with the Pacific Ocean behind us. He looked at the picture for a long moment before quietly asking, "Did you ever love me?" I met his eyes. "More than you ever realized." He swallowed hard. "Then why are you doing this?" I looked past him at the garage. "Because the moment you decided your wife belonged there." I paused. "You stopped treating me like someone you loved." He lowered his head. Before he could answer, the new owner walked over carrying a set of keys. He smiled politely at me before turning toward Jason. "Sir." He held out his hand. "I'll need every copy of the house keys." Jason looked down at the keys in his palm and slowly realized he no longer had a home to unlock. Jason dropped the house keys into the new owner's hand without saying a word. The sound of the metal hitting his palm echoed louder than anyone expected. Diane stood beside the SUV with her arms crossed, still refusing to believe this was really happening. "We'll sue her," she snapped. "We'll take everything she has." The buyer's attorney calmly closed his folder. "You're welcome to speak with your own attorney, ma'am." Diane looked at Jason. "Call yours." Jason didn't move. He kept staring at me instead. Finally he spoke. "Emma, can we talk?" I nodded once. For 5 minutes. We walked toward the end of the driveway while everyone else stayed behind. The ocean breeze was cool, and for the first time in years we stood alone without anyone interrupting us. Jason rubbed his face with both hands. I keep asking myself where everything went wrong. I looked at him quietly. "It didn't happen today." He frowned. "Then when?" I glanced back at the garage. "The night you looked at your wife and decided she belonged out there." Jason closed his eyes. "I didn't think it was a big deal." I smiled sadly. "That's exactly why we're here." He slowly shook his head. "I thought you'd be angry for a day or two." I wasn't angry. I answered calmly. I was done. The words seemed to hit him harder than losing the house itself. "You never told me how close we were to losing each other." I looked directly into his eyes. "I told you every time you ignored me. Every time you chose your mother's comfort over my dignity. Every time you laughed when I said I felt invisible." He lowered his head. "I thought you were overreacting." I know. There was nothing left to argue about. He had believed his own excuses for too long. Now he was finally hearing them from someone who no longer needed him to understand. As I turned to leave, Jason reached for my hand but stopped before touching it. "Emma." His voice cracked. "If I ask you to come back, would you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at the moving trucks disappearing down the street, carrying away the last pieces of the life we had built together. Then I looked back at him. "You think this story is about a house?" I shook my head gently. "It never was." I took one step backward. "You lost me long before you lost this address." I walked to my car without looking back. As I started the engine, my phone rang. It was my attorney. "Emma," he said, "there's one more document I forgot to tell you about." I frowned. "What document?" He paused for a moment before answering. "The prenuptial agreement Jason signed on your wedding day." I pulled my car into a quiet parking lot overlooking the Pacific Ocean before answering my attorney's call. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I already know the house was mine." He sighed softly. "The house isn't what I'm talking about." I frowned. "Then what is it?" I heard papers rustling on his desk. "When you and Jason got married, you signed a prenuptial agreement. You read every page." He didn't. I closed my eyes, trying to remember that afternoon. Jason had laughed and signed wherever the attorney pointed. It's just paperwork, he had said. My attorney continued, there's one clause I don't think either of you expected to matter. Which one? If the marriage ended because one spouse created an abusive or degrading living environment for the other, the injured spouse would keep every separate asset and could seek reimbursement for every shared expense paid from personal funds. I sat in silence. You're saying? I'm saying Jason may owe you much more than he realizes. The following Monday, Jason received the divorce papers. He called me 6 times before noon. I answered on the 7th call, Emma. Please tell me this isn't real. His voice sounded completely different. There was no anger left. Only panic. It's real. He took a deep breath. I know I made mistakes. You did. I'll ask my mother to leave. I remained silent. We'll buy another house. Silence again. I'll do anything. I finally spoke. You still don't understand. He whispered, then helped me understand. I looked out toward the ocean through my apartment window. This was never about your mother. He didn't answer. It was about the fact that the person who promised to protect me was the one who humiliated me. The line remained quiet for several seconds. Then I heard him crying for the first time since I had known him. I love you, Emma. I closed my eyes. Maybe you do. I paused. But love without respect doesn't save a marriage. 2 weeks later, we met for the first time since the day he handed over the keys. The meeting took place in a mediation office overlooking Newport Harbor. Jason looked exhausted. He had lost weight. The confidence he once carried was gone. He quietly signed every page without arguing. Before standing up, he looked directly at me. If I could go back to that night. His voice broke. I'd sleep in the garage myself. I believed him. The problem was that it no longer mattered. Some lessons arrive only after the damage is permanent. As I gathered my documents, my attorney smiled gently. Everything is complete. I nodded and walked toward the exit. Just before I reached the door, Jason spoke one last time, Emma. I turned around. He forced a sad smile. I hope one day someone loves you the way I should have. I looked at him for a long moment, then quietly walked away without saying another word. 3 months later, the divorce was officially over. The judge signed the final order in less than 10 minutes. There were no arguments, no dramatic speeches, and no last-minute surprises. Jason accepted every condition. As we walked out of the courthouse, he stopped a few feet away from me. He looked older than he had only a few months earlier. Emma, he said quietly, I don't expect forgiveness anymore. I nodded. That's probably for the best. He looked down before continuing. My mother moved to Arizona with my sister last month. I didn't answer. I finally realized something. He forced a small smile. She didn't destroy my marriage. He looked me in the eyes. I did. For the first time since everything happened, I saw complete honesty in his face. Not because he wanted me back. Because he finally accepted responsibility. I wished him well and walked toward my car. That chapter of my life was finally over. 6 months later, I bought a smaller house overlooking Laguna Beach. It wasn't as large as my old home, but every room felt peaceful. I decorated it exactly the way I wanted. Fresh flowers stood on the dining table every morning. Soft music filled the living room every evening. No one criticized the meals I cooked. No one told me where I was allowed to sleep. One Saturday afternoon, I invited my attorney and Olivia Brooks to dinner as a thank you for everything they had done. Olivia smiled as she looked around the house. You seem different. I laughed softly. I am. She asked, happier? I thought about it for a moment. No. I looked through the large windows toward the Pacific Ocean. Peaceful. There was a difference. Happiness comes and goes. Peace stays when you finally stop allowing the wrong people to control your life. Sometimes people ask if I regret selling that house. My answer is always the same. I didn't lose a home. I escaped a place where I had stopped being respected. The night I carried my pillow into the garage felt like the worst night of my life. Looking back now, it was the night that saved it. If Jason had never asked me to sleep there, I might have spent years convincing myself that things would eventually get better. Instead, one sentence changed everything. As the sun disappeared beyond the California coastline, I locked the front door of my new home, smiled to myself, and realized something simple but powerful. The best revenge was never selling the house. The best revenge was rebuilding a life where nobody could ever make me feel unwelcome again. The end.